A veteran returned from war with nothing but his old German shepherd and a forgotten farm he planned to sell and leave behind. But why did his dog stop at the barn and refuse to move? Who were the strangers hiding on land that legally belonged to him? Why did one act of kindness nearly cost him everything he had left? And when the money ran out and pressure closed in, why did his dog lead him to something buried beneath the ground? A secret his parents never spoke of, a legacy never meant to be sold. Before we begin, I hope this story finds you gently today. Tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment, and if stories of courage and second chances matter to you, please subscribe and stay with us. Early spring had not fully arrived. The sky hung low and pale, stretched thin over fields still bruised by winter. Mud clung to the gravel road, and the air smelled of damp wood and cold earth. A quiet wind moved through bare branches, carrying the kind of silence that only forgotten places remembered. Daniel Carter slowed his truck as the old farm came into view. He did not sigh or swear. He simply watched. At 48, Daniel had learned not to waste energy on reactions that changed nothing. His face was weathered, not from age, but from years of exposure. Sun, dust, sleepless nights, and long stretches of vigilance had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair, once a deep brown, now carried streaks of gray at the temples, cut short out of habit rather than style. A trimmed beard shadowed his jaw, giving his face sharp angles that softened only when he looked away from the world. The truck rattled to a stop near the fence line. Paint peeled from the farmhouse ahead, white once, now dulled and flaking. The roof sagged slightly on the east side. One window had been boarded years ago and never fixed. To the left, a barn leaned as if tired of holding itself upright. Daniel turned off the engine and sat still, hands resting on the steering wheel longer than necessary. This place was his now, on paper at least. He stepped out, boots sinking into wet ground. His jacket, a faded work coat patched at the elbows, hung heavy on his shoulders. The cold did not bother him. It rarely did anymore. What unsettled him was the familiarity. Every angle of the land carried memory, though none of them felt welcoming. Behind him, Rex jumped down from the truck bed with practiced ease. The German shepherd was large, powerfully built, his frame lean but solid, muscles defined beneath a thick coat of black and tan fur. Silver had begun to creep around his muzzle, marking him older than he once was, but his posture remained precise. Rex did not bounce or wander. He stood alert, ears forward, amber eyes scanning the property as if conducting a silent assessment. Rex had served alongside Daniel for years overseas. He had learned restraint before play, patience before trust. At nearly 9 years old, the dog moved with the calm certainty of one who had seen enough danger to recognize when none was present, or when it was simply waiting. Daniel glanced at him. "You see it too, don't you?" He did not say the words aloud. Rex did not need them. They walked together toward the house. The porch creaked under Daniel's weight. He noticed immediately what needed fixing. Loose boards, rot near the steps. The door frame warped from moisture. He cataloged the damage the same way he once mapped exits and cover points. Assess first. Decide later. Inside, the air was stale but not dead. Dust floated in the thin light that slipped through uncurtained windows. The living room was smaller than Daniel remembered. Or perhaps he had simply grown into a man who took up more space than the boy who once lived here. Furniture sat where it had always been. A couch with worn arms, a coffee table scarred with old rings. Nothing had collapsed. Nothing had been improved. Daniel set his bag down and walked through slowly. The floorboards groaned in places. Electrical wires ran along the walls in a way that told him his father had done the work himself. Not pretty, but functional. Always functional. His parents had lived like that, especially his father, Thomas Carter. Thomas had been a man of few words and hard edges, broad-shouldered even into his later years. With a heavy brow and a beard he kept trimmed close, his presence had filled rooms without demanding attention. He had worked maintenance at a regional plant until layoffs came without warning. That single event had changed him, not into something cruel, but into someone quieter, more inward. He believed in fixing what broke. Machines, fences, sometimes people, though he never said that part aloud. Daniel had inherited that silence. His mother, Sarah Carter, had been different. She was slender, average height, with warm brown hair that she wore loose when she could and tied back when work demanded it. Her skin carried the soft marks of years spent gardening and cooking for others, pale but weathered, hands always smelling faintly of soap and soil. Sarah smiled easily, worried quietly, and loved fiercely without conditions. She noticed when people were tired and fed them anyway. Daniel paused in the kitchen, resting a hand on the counter. The space felt wrong without her. Not empty, just unfinished. Rex followed him in, nails clicking softly on the floor. The dog's nose lowered, moving in slow arcs. Not searching. Reading. Daniel watched him out of the corner of his eye. Rex did not behave like a dog in a new place. He moved like someone returning to a location that demanded respect. The sound of dripping pulled Daniel's attention upward. Water leaked steadily from a small stain in the ceiling. He exhaled through his nose. Roof's gone. That would cost money he did not have. Daniel moved back toward the front room and sat heavily in one of the old chairs. The weight of the decision he had been avoiding settled in his chest. He had come here with a plan, if it could be called that. Stay a few days. Clean enough to make it presentable. Call a realtor. Sell. Walk away. Because keeping this place was not possible. He had worked construction, repairs, hauling, cash jobs, seasonal contracts, enough to eat, enough to sleep, never enough to save. The inheritance came with unpaid taxes, deferred maintenance, and memories he had spent years outrunning. Rex lay down near the door, positioning himself so he could see both the hallway and the kitchen. Daniel noticed that too. Always the same instinct. Protect the threshold. I can't keep this, Daniel thought. The words did not hurt the way he expected. They felt practical, necessary. Like pulling a splinter before it infected the whole hand. He stood again and walked outside. The barn called to him, not sentimentally, but mechanically. It was the structure in the worst shape, which meant it needed attention first. Rex rose immediately and followed. The barn door resisted when Daniel pulled it open. Hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the smell of old hay and damp wood lingered. Several beams had cracked. One corner sagged dangerously. Daniel frowned, already calculating costs, labor, hours he did not have. Rex stepped past him and stopped abruptly near the far wall. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply froze. Daniel felt it then. Not fear, awareness. Rex's ears tilted forward. His body went rigid, tail still. This was not curiosity. This was recognition. Daniel's hand drifted instinctively toward his pocket, where an old habit rested more than a tool. He did not draw anything. He did not speak. Rex looked back at him briefly, amber eyes steady, then turned his gaze to the corner again. Someone had been here. Recently. Daniel's chest tightened, not with panic, but with calculation. The barn showed signs he had not noticed at first. Fresh scuff marks on the dirt. Hay disturbed in a way the wind could not manage. A faint smell of smoke that did not belong to rot or age. He took a slow step forward. Rex did not move to block him. He simply stayed close, shoulder nearly brushing Daniel's leg. That told him everything he needed to know. Whoever was here was not a threat. Not in Rex's judgment. Daniel straightened and stepped back. He closed the barn door quietly, the way one did when choosing not to confront something yet. He rested his forehead briefly against the wood, eyes closed. This was not part of the plan, but neither had anything else in his life been. As he walked back toward the house, Rex stayed at his side, calm and watchful. The farm no longer felt empty. It felt occupied by questions Daniel was not ready to answer. He looked once more at the sagging roof, the broken fence, the land stretching quietly beyond. He had come here intending to leave. Instead, he felt the weight of staying press against him, invisible but firm. Daniel did not know yet that this place would ask more of him than he believed he had left to give. He only knew one thing with certainty. Rex had noticed something before he had. And Rex was rarely wrong. Morning came gray and damp, the kind of light that made everything look unfinished. Daniel woke on the narrow bed he had dragged into the living room, his back stiff, his mind already cataloging problems. The roof still leaked. The barn still leaned. And now there was the certainty he could not ignore anymore. Someone else was here. Rex rose the moment Daniel sat up. The German shepherd stretched once, controlled and quiet, then walked to the door as if reporting for duty. His ears angled forward, not tense, not relaxed, alert in the way only working dogs learn to be. Daniel followed him outside, breath fogging faintly in the cool air. The barn door stood exactly as Daniel had left it. No new sounds, no movement. Rex paused, nose low, tail steady. He did not bark. He waited. Daniel stepped forward and called out, his voice calm, unforced. "Hello? I'm not here to cause trouble?" Silence answered him at first. Then, slowly, a shape shifted in the far corner. A man emerged from behind stacked crates, tall but stooped, shoulders rounded as if habit had trained them to expect blows. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, with thinning gray hair and a beard that had once been black, but now carried more white than color. His clothes were worn but clean, work pants patched at the knees, a heavy sweater that had seen too many winters. His hands were large and rough, the kind shaped by decades of physical labor. Behind him stood a girl. She could not have been older than 10 or 11. Small for her age, thin in a way that spoke of careful rationing rather than neglect. Her light brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail, loose strands framing a pale face dotted with faint freckles. Her eyes were dark and watchful, fixed on Daniel with a mixture of fear and readiness, like someone who had learned too early that adults were not always safe. The man raised one hand slowly. "We'll leave," he said. His voice was steady but strained, like a rope pulled too tight. "I swear. We didn't mean any harm, just needed somewhere dry." Daniel did not answer right away. He took in the scene the way he once read rooms overseas. Distance, body language, The girl's positioned slightly behind the man, but close enough to touch his sleeve. The way the man angled his body subtly to shield her without making it obvious. This was not theft. This was shelter. Rex stepped forward before Daniel could speak. The dog crossed the dirt floor with deliberate slowness and stopped a few feet from the girl. He lowered himself to the ground and lay down, forelegs extended, head resting on his paws. His eyes softened. His tail did not move. The girl froze. Her breath caught. Then, without quite deciding to, she took a half-step closer. Rex did not flinch. He stayed exactly where he was, solid and warm and unmistakably present. The girl dropped to her knees beside him and pressed her fingers into the thick fur along his neck. Her shoulders shook. She did not sob loudly. She cried the way children did when they had learned to keep quiet. The man turned his face away for a moment. Daniel saw his jaw tighten, saw the fight to stay upright. Daniel exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "Nobody's leaving right now?" The man looked at him sharply. "You don't have to do this." "I know," Daniel said. "That's the point." They moved into the house cautiously, like guests who did not trust the welcome yet. Daniel set a kettle on the stove, working around the flickering light. He noticed the girl's eyes tracking everything. Exits. Corners. Rex followed her movements, never crowding, never leaving her sight. The man introduced himself as Frank Miller. He had worked most of his life as a farmhand, and later as seasonal labor wherever he could find it. His back was bent, not from age alone, but from an accident years earlier when a tractor rolled unexpectedly on wet ground. The injury had ended steady work and made him cautious, quiet, fiercely protective of what little stability he had left. The girl was Emily, his granddaughter. Her mother, Frank's daughter, had died 2 years earlier after a long illness that drained savings and options alike. There was no father in the picture. Frank spoke plainly, without embellishment, as if facts were safer than feelings. "We tried shelters," he said. "Didn't last. Too many questions. Too much paperwork. She nearly got flagged for separation once. So we left." Daniel nodded once. He did not ask for details. He did not need them. They ate quietly. Bread. Soup thin enough to stretch. Emily kept glancing at Rex as if afraid he might disappear. When she finished, she pushed her bowl forward without being asked and sat with her hands folded in her lap. Too polite. Too careful. "You can stay," Daniel said finally. The words landed heavier than he expected. "Not forever. We'll figure things out, but you can stay." Frank opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes shone briefly before he looked down. "Thank you," he said. "We won't be trouble." Daniel almost smiled. "Trouble isn't always loud," he said. "Most of the time it's just expensive. Reality set in quickly." Over the next few days, the strain showed itself in small, relentless ways. Food ran low faster. The electricity cut out twice. The leak in the roof worsened with every rain. Daniel picked up extra work, hauling scrap and fixing fences for neighbors who barely remembered him. He came home exhausted, hands raw, shoulders aching in ways that had nothing to do with age. Frank insisted on helping, despite the pain that stiffened his movements. He repaired what he could, slowly and methodically, never wasting motion. Emily stayed close to Rex, who seemed to understand his new assignment instinctively. He slept near the doorway at night. He walked Emily to the edge of the yard and waited while she explored. He placed himself between her and the world whenever voices rose. Daniel noticed the costs adding up in his head. Every extra mouth meant fewer options. Selling the land would be harder with people living here. Legal risks hovered unspoken. He woke one night staring at the ceiling, rain tapping steadily above, wondering if kindness had finally overreached his capacity. Frank approached him the next morning, hat in hand. "We'll go soon," he said. "You've done enough." Daniel looked past him at Emily, crouched beside Rex in the yard, laughing quietly as the dog nudged a stick toward her. "No," Daniel said. "Not yet." Because he understood something now that he had tried not to. Leaving them would not simplify his life. It would hollow it. As evening fell, Daniel stood on the porch watching the farm settle into a fragile rhythm. The place was still broken. The bills were still coming. The future remained unclear, but the house was no longer silent. Rex lay near Emily's feet, eyes half closed, ears flicking at every sound. Frank sat nearby, shoulders easing for the first time since Daniel had met him. Daniel felt the weight of the choice he had made pressed down on him, heavy and unavoidable. Long taught, he thought, did not arrive with solutions. It arrived with consequences. And he had chosen it anyway. The rhythm of the farm changed in subtle, relentless ways. Morning no longer began with silence. It began with calculation. Daniel woke before dawn, pulled on boots still damp from the night before, and stood at the sink counting what remained. 2 cans of beans, half a loaf of bread, coffee stretched thin. He wrote numbers in his head the way he once tracked days on deployment, knowing exactly how long supplies could last if nothing went wrong. Something always did. Rex sensed the shift before anyone spoke of it. The German Shepherd adjusted his routines without instruction. He waited by the door while Daniel laced his boots, head lifted, eyes steady. He followed Frank during the day, pacing his steps to match the older man's slower movements. When Daniel left early for work, Rex positioned himself near the yard gate, not guarding against intruders, but holding the space together. Daniel took every job he could find. Fence repairs for a neighbor who paid in cash and eggs. A roof patch across town that left his shoulders burning for 2 days. Hauling scrap metal until his hands blistered open again. He returned home each evening with his body depleted and his mind heavy. There was no margin left. Every act of generosity showed up as a number he could not ignore. Frank tried to help, despite the stiffness that crept into his joints each morning. His hands shook when the pain flared, a reminder of the spinal injury that had never healed properly. He moved with care, conserving energy, choosing tasks that required precision rather than strength. He mended hinges. He sharpened tools. He repaired a broken latch with quiet competence. Years of work in fields and barns had taught him patience, not speed. Emily watched all of it with eyes that missed nothing. She stayed out of the way, folded laundry without being asked, washed dishes with exaggerated care. Her hunger showed not in complaints, but in the way she paused before eating, as if waiting for permission. Rex remained close, a constant reassurance. He slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound, but never alarming her. When she laughed, it came softly, surprised by itself. Bills arrived faster than Daniel expected. One afternoon, a white envelope waited in the mailbox, its edges crisp and official. Inside was a notice from the county regarding overdue property taxes. The language was formal, precise, unforgiving. Daniel read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. He did not swear. He simply sat there longer than necessary, jaw tight, breathing measured. That evening, Frank approached him slowly. His shoulders were set, his posture deliberate. "I can go into town tomorrow," he said. "Find work. Anything." Daniel shook his head. "Not with your back." Frank did not argue, but the silence between them thickened. Pride did not disappear just because circumstances demanded humility. Emily needed school. That reality surfaced one morning when she stood on the porch, watching a yellow bus pass at the end of the road. She did not ask. She did not even look disappointed. She simply tracked it until it disappeared and then turned back inside. Daniel saw it all. The way her shoulders squared, the way she swallowed something that should not have been hers to carry. He drove into town the next day. Rex riding in the truck bed, ears forward, posture alert. The school office smelled of paper and disinfectant. A woman stood behind the desk, mid-50s, medium build, hair pulled into a practical bun streaked with gray. Her name was Linda Perez. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and looked at Daniel with a blend of professionalism and tired compassion. She listened without interrupting as he explained the situation in careful terms. "We can enroll her temporarily," Linda said, "but paperwork needs to follow. Proof of address, guardianship clarification, transportation." Daniel nodded. He had expected this. Systems did not bend easily. Linda softened slightly when Rex lay down at Daniel's feet, calm and unmoving. She smiled despite herself. "She's lucky to have stability," she said. Daniel did not correct her. Stability was relative. Frank's health faltered quietly. A cough lingered longer than it should have. He brushed it off, insisted it was nothing. Daniel noticed the way his hands trembled when the mornings were cold. He noticed the pills Frank rationed without comment. Medical care meant cost. Cost meant choices. Rex seemed to understand the pressure settling over the household. He remained vigilant, but gentle. When tensions rose, he placed himself between voices, grounding the moment. He escorted Emily to the edge of the yard and waited while she practiced spelling words out loud. He sat near Frank during long afternoons, head resting on his knee, as if offering warmth where medication could not. The farm itself demanded more each day. The leak spread. A breaker tripped and refused to reset. The barn sagged another inch after heavy rain. Daniel lay awake at night, listening to the sounds of a place slowly failing, calculating repairs he could not afford. He began to wonder if kindness was something he could ration, like food. If maybe he had misjudged his own capacity. One afternoon, Daniel returned home early to find a pickup truck parked near the road. A man leaned against it, clipboard in hand. He was tall, clean-shaven, with sharp features and hair neatly combed despite the wind. His jacket was pressed, his boots polished. His name was Harold Bennett, a county assessor. His demeanor was polite, efficient, distant. "Just routine," Harold said, following up on delinquent accounts. Daniel nodded and listened as Harold explained timelines, consequences, options. The words were neutral. The meaning was not. When Harold left, the truck disappeared down the road without ceremony. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. That night, Daniel stood alone in the barn, staring at the far wall, where Rex had frozen days earlier. The dog stood beside him now, shoulder close, breathing steady. Daniel rested his forehead briefly against the cool wood and closed his eyes. He thought of his mother's hands, always busy, always giving. He thought of his father's stubborn refusal to abandon broken things. He wondered if he was honoring them or simply repeating a pattern that ended in exhaustion. Frank approached quietly. "You're carrying too much," he said. Daniel did not answer, because the question had formed fully now, impossible to ignore. Am I saving people, he thought, or am I sinking with them? Rex shifted his weight and leaned into Daniel's leg, grounding him. The choice remained unresolved, heavy and unavoidable. The farm creaked softly around them, as if listening. The first sign that pressure was becoming intentional arrived on a clear afternoon, the kind that made trouble feel out of place. Daniel was repairing a hinge on the barn door when a dark sedan rolled slowly up the gravel drive. It stopped with precision near the fence, tires aligned as if the driver disliked disorder. Rex lifted his head at once, ears angling forward, body still, not alarmed, measuring. The man who stepped out was dressed for offices, not fields. He was in his mid-40s, tall, lean, with a narrow face sharpened by discipline rather than kindness. His hair was dark, neatly parted, untouched by wind. A clean shave revealed cheekbones that gave him a perpetual look of evaluation. His jacket fit perfectly, uncreased. His shoes did not sink into the mud because he did not step where mud gathered. He smiled as he approached, an expression practiced enough to appear friendly without promising warmth. "Daniel Carter," he said. "Mark Holloway." He extended a hand. Daniel wiped his palms on his jeans and shook it. The grip was firm, brief. Mark's eyes moved immediately, not rudely, but thoroughly. The sagging barn, the patched roof, the old fence line. Frank watching from the porch with a guarded posture. Emily hovering near the doorway, Rex positioned between her and the yard without being told. "I won't take much of your time," Mark said. He spoke evenly, without haste, as if he controlled the schedule by default. "I work with land acquisitions in the county. Agricultural properties, mostly. I keep an eye on places like this." Daniel nodded once. He had learned long ago that people who began with explanations rarely stopped at them. Mark gestured lightly toward the house. "I knew your parents," he said. "Not well, but well enough to know they kept things close to the chest. Hard-working people, the kind that didn't ask for help even when they should have." The mention of his parents tightened something in Daniel's chest. He did not respond. Mark continued, conversational. "Properties like this tend to fall into trouble when transitions aren't clean. Deferred taxes, zoning gray areas." He glanced toward Frank and Emily. "Occupancy issues." Frank straightened slightly, jaw set. Rex rose and moved one step closer to Emily, his presence unmistakable. Mark noticed everything. He adjusted his tone, not softer, just clearer. "I'm not here to threaten you, Daniel. I'm here to offer a solution." They stood by the fence as Mark laid it out with calm efficiency. He could purchase the farm at a price that reflected its current condition. He would assume the overdue taxes, handle the paperwork, make the problems disappear. His voice remained level, almost sympathetic. "You've had a hard run," Mark said. "Military service, drifting work, no safety net. You don't strike me as someone built to carry long-term risk." He paused deliberately. "You're not a bad man, but you're not built to carry the weight of everyone else." Daniel met, his gaze steadily. He saw no malice there, only certainty. The kind that came from always being right because the world rewarded it. "I'm not selling," Daniel said. Mark blinked once, recalibrating. "I think you should consider it," he said. "Quickly, before things get more complicated." "They already are," Daniel replied. Mark's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair enough." He stepped back toward his car, then paused. "One more thing. You might want to be careful about who stays on your property. The county has processes. Anonymous complaints happen, sometimes at inconvenient moments." He left then, the sedan pulling away with the same measured restraint it had arrived with. Dust settled slowly behind it. The following day, the inconvenience arrived. A county truck pulled in mid-morning, followed by a smaller vehicle with official markings. 2 men stepped out. One was the assessor Daniel had met before. Harold Bennett looked uncomfortable now, his clipboard held closer to his chest. The other was younger, broader, with a badge clipped to his belt and boots that suggested he was more accustomed to walking lines than sitting desks. His name was Evan Cole, Land Use Inspector. "We need to take a look around," Evan said, voice neutral. "Received a report, nothing personal." Daniel nodded and walked with them. He did not argue. He did not protest. He answered questions carefully. Yes, the roof leaked. Yes, the barn was unstable. Yes, there were additional occupants. No, there was no lease. No, there was no formal agreement. Frank stood silent, hat in hand. Emily stayed inside with Rex, who sat near the window, eyes fixed, body still. The inspection was thorough but correct. Notes were taken, photographs snapped. Evan explained timelines, potential citations, required actions. Everything he said followed the book. That was the problem. After they left, the farm felt smaller. Frank approached Daniel slowly. "We should go," he said. "This is my fault." Daniel shook his head. "It isn't." "It is," Frank insisted. He glanced toward the house where Emily sat on the steps, arms wrapped around Rex's neck. "I've lived long enough to know when I'm the weight dragging something under." Daniel watched the pair on the porch. Rex lifted his head as if listening, then lowered it again against Emily's shoulder. The dog did not look toward Daniel for guidance. He held his position. "We're not leaving today," Daniel said. The words came out firmer than he expected. "We'll deal with this." That evening, Daniel found another envelope in the mailbox. This one was thinner. Inside was a notice requesting compliance within a limited window. Failure would result in further action. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it with the others. Sleep came late. Rain tapped lightly against the roof. Each drip counted time. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the same water stains spreading slowly like a map he had memorized too well. He thought of his mother, Sarah, standing at this very sink years ago, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, feeding whoever happened to show up hungry. He thought of his father, Thomas, fixing fences no one paid him to mend because broken things bothered him. Had they known this would happen? Had they prepared for it? Or had they simply trusted that someone would choose to stay? Morning brought resolve rather than clarity. Daniel went to the barn early, tools in hand, Rex following. The far wall where Rex had first stopped days earlier drew him again. The wood there was older, darker, reinforced in a way that did not match the rest. Daniel pressed against it, listening. Hollow. Rex sat down abruptly, eyes fixed on the spot. Not tense, certain. Daniel ran his hand along the beam, fingers catching on a seam hidden beneath grime and age. He paused, heart thudding not with fear, but with the weight of possibility. He did not pry it open yet. He rested his forehead against the wood, breathing slow, steady. Pressure had arrived, not with shouting or force, but with paperwork and timing and polite certainty. Mark Holloway had been right about one thing. The world did not wait for good intentions. Daniel straightened and looked down at Rex. The dog met his eyes, calm, unwavering. Whatever lay behind that wall had been placed there deliberately. Not forgotten. Waiting. Daniel did not know yet if it was salvation or another burden. He only knew that walking away had stopped being an option the moment he chose to stand his ground. The farm creaked softly around them, as if acknowledging the shift. The next move would decide everything. The decision came quietly, the way the most painful ones often did. Daniel did not hear it in an argument or a raised voice. He found it folded neatly on the kitchen table one morning, written in Frank's careful, slanted handwriting on a torn page from an old notebook. Daniel, we'll be gone by nightfall. You've done more than enough. Daniel stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. The house was still. Too still. He knew, before he even turned his head, that Frank was already packing. Frank Miller moved slowly through the living room, placing items into a worn canvas bag with deliberate care. His back was straighter than usual, not because the pain had eased, but because pride had taken over where comfort failed. His face looked older in the morning light. Deep lines ran from his nose to his mouth, carved by years of hard work and disappointment. His gray beard had been trimmed neatly, a habit from a time when dignity was one of the few things he could control. Emily stood frozen near the doorway. She clutched her jacket to her chest, knuckles white, eyes wide and glassy. Her breathing came in short, shallow pulls, like someone bracing for a blow she could not see. When Frank lifted the bag onto his shoulder, something in her broke. "No," she whispered at first, the word barely forming, then louder. "No. Please." She crossed the room in 2 quick steps and wrapped her arms around Frank's waist, pressing her face into his sweater. Her small body shook violently. Rex was there immediately. The German shepherd moved with a speed that startled Daniel, sliding between them and lowering himself to the floor beside Emily. He leaned his full weight against her legs, grounding her, absorbing the tremors she could not stop. Frank closed his eyes. "This isn't your fault," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "I promised your mother I'd keep you safe." Daniel felt the room tilt. He stepped forward, anger and guilt tangling in his chest. "You don't have to go," he said. Frank shook his head. "I do. The county's watching now. And that man from the car." He looked at Daniel steadily. "I've seen men like him before. He's patient. He'll wait you out." Emily's sobs turned frantic. She clung to Rex, fingers buried in his thick fur, as if the dog were the only solid thing left in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. Rex did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, body warm, eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. Daniel looked away. He could not trust his voice. By afternoon, Frank was gone. Daniel watched the old man walk down the gravel road with his bag slung over one shoulder, his steps uneven but determined. Emily sat on the porch, knees drawn to her chest, silent now, exhausted by grief. Rex sat beside her, head resting lightly against her arm. That night, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table. The stack of envelopes lay spread before him like evidence, taxes, notices, deadlines. His hands were steady, but his mind was not. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean by responsibility he had not been prepared to shoulder alone. He had tried to do the right thing. He had tried to choose people. And now the cost stood in front of him, undeniable. The house creaked softly around him. Wind slipped through the cracks in the siding. The roof dripped in its familiar, mocking rhythm. Daniel pressed his palms flat against the table and bowed his head. He thought of Sarah, his mother, standing in this same kitchen years ago, her slender frame moving easily as she cooked for neighbors who never asked how she managed. Her hair had always been a warm brown, falling past her shoulders when she forgot to tie it back. Her skin had been pale but strong, marked by sun and time, her eyes gentle even when worry lived behind them. She had never spoken of sacrifice as something heroic. She had treated it as normal. His father, Thomas, had been different, broad and quiet, with hands that could fix almost anything. He had believed that if you stayed long enough, worked hard enough, things would eventually hold together. Daniel pushed back from the table and stood abruptly. He needed air. He needed movement. He needed something that did not ask him to choose between survival and decency. Rex rose at once and followed him out toward the barn. The sky had darkened early, heavy with clouds that threatened more rain. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through dust and shadow. The far wall drew him again, the same place Rex had marked days earlier. Daniel remembered his father's habits. Thomas had never trusted open spaces for important things. He had believed in hiding in plain sight, in building layers that only patience would reveal. Daniel ran his hand along the wood, feeling the grain, the subtle differences where age and purpose diverged. Rex stopped abruptly and sat down. Not tense, certain. Daniel knelt and pressed against the lower boards. The sound changed, hollow. His pulse quickened. He pried carefully, not forcing, following the seams his father would have used. A panel gave way with a muted crack, revealing a narrow space beneath the floor. Inside lay a metal box, dulled by time but intact. Daniel pulled it free and set it on the dirt. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were documents wrapped in oilcloth, a bundle of handwritten pages, and beneath them, envelopes thick with neatly stacked bills, old but well preserved. Daniel sat back hard on his heels, breath leaving him in a rush. He unfolded the papers first. The handwriting was unmistakable. His mother's careful script, rounded and patient, lines alternating with his father's firmer, more angular notes. "If you are reading this," the letter began, "then you stayed long enough to see what mattered." Daniel's vision blurred. The words spoke plainly about the farm, about the people they had sheltered quietly over the years, about why they had never sold, never asked for help, never trusted systems that did not see individuals. The money was not an inheritance meant to make him comfortable. It was a tool, a responsibility. "If you find this," his father had written, "it means you chose people over profit." That was always the condition. Daniel folded the letter slowly and stared at the cash. It was not a fortune. It would not erase everything. But it was enough. Enough to fix the roof. Enough to settle the taxes. Enough to give Emily stability and bring Frank back. Rex stepped closer and rested his head against Daniel's shoulder. The dog's presence was steady, grounding him back into the moment. Daniel closed his eyes and leaned into it. For the first time in days, the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but bearable. He stood and replaced the panel carefully, leaving the barn exactly as it had been. Some things did not need to be known yet. When Daniel returned to the house, Emily looked up from the couch. Her eyes searched his face, braced for another loss. Daniel knelt in front of her. "We're not losing the farm," he said quietly, "and you're not leaving." She stared at him, hope and disbelief tangled together. Rex sat beside her, tail thumping once against the floor. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was coming. But for the first time, Daniel knew he was no longer standing empty-handed. Daniel did not sleep much that night. The letter stayed folded in his jacket pocket, the weight of it pressing against his chest like a quiet promise that refused to let him forget. When morning came, it arrived without ceremony. Gray light slipped through the windows, touching the worn table, the cracked walls, the place where Emily had curled up beside Rex on the couch, finally asleep after hours of silent fear. Daniel stood, careful not to wake them. He stepped outside, the cold biting gently at his face, and breathed in the smell of damp earth and old wood. For the first time since he arrived, his thoughts did not scatter in every direction. They lined up, one by one, practical, measured. He was not leaving. The money stayed hidden. Daniel did not count it twice. He already knew what it meant. It was not freedom. It was responsibility given shape. He drove into town that morning with Rex riding in the truck bed, posture steady, ears angled forward. The courthouse smelled of paper and coffee, a familiar blend of bureaucracy and routine. Daniel spoke calmly, asked questions, listened. He paid the overdue property taxes in full. The clerk, a thin woman with tired eyes and a voice worn smooth by repetition, looked up at him with mild surprise. Not many people did this without argument. Outside, Daniel sat in the truck for a moment before starting the engine. One burden lifted did not mean the weight was gone. It meant he could stand straighter under it. Repairs came next, only what was necessary. Daniel hired a roofer he knew from past jobs, a broad-shouldered man named Aaron Pike with a sunburned neck and a habit of whistling while he worked. Aaron did not ask questions. He fixed the leak, reinforced the weak beams, accepted payment without commentary. The lights stopped flickering after Daniel replaced wiring that should have been redone years ago. The house did not become new. It became livable. Frank returned 2 days later. Daniel heard him before. He saw him, the uneven crunch of gravel under careful steps. Frank stood at the edge of the yard, bag slung over his shoulder, uncertainty etched deep into his face. His shoulders sagged, exhaustion overtaking pride. Daniel walked toward him without hesitation. "You didn't have to come back," Frank said. "I did," Daniel replied. Emily appeared behind him, eyes wide, disbelief blooming into something fragile and bright. She ran, stopping only when Rex stepped aside to let her pass. She wrapped her arms around Frank, then Rex, then Daniel, as if afraid one of them might vanish if she did not hold on tight enough. The farm shifted again, settling into a new rhythm. Daniel spent afternoons sorting paperwork, registering the property properly, filing documents his parents had delayed out of quiet distrust. The land was officially his now, but he did not treat it as possession. He treated it as stewardship. That was when Mark Holloway returned. This time the sedan parked farther from the house. Mark approached on foot, jacket still crisp, hair still immaculate, but something in his posture had changed. His confidence remained, but the edge had sharpened. He nodded at Daniel, eyes flicking briefly to the repaired roof, the cleared yard, the signs of work underway. "You've been busy," Mark said. Daniel did not offer him a seat. He remained standing, Rex at his side. The German shepherd watched Mark closely, not threatening, but unmistakably present. "I hear the taxes are settled," Mark continued. "That simplifies things." Daniel met his gaze. "It does." Mark's lips curved slightly. "You could still walk away clean, even now. Sell while the land's stable, before the next storm." Daniel shook his head. "The farm isn't for sale." Mark studied him for a long moment. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe I'm finally making it honest." Mark exhaled slowly. "What are you planning?" Daniel spoke plainly. "I'm keeping the farm. I'm opening it. Temporary shelter, work exchange, nothing illegal, everything documented. I'm not running a charity. I'm running a place where people can breathe long enough to stand again." Silence stretched between them. Mark glanced toward Frank, bent over a workbench, hands steady despite the tremor that never fully left them. He looked at Emily reading on the porch steps, Rex lying beside her, head lifted, eyes tracking the world with quiet vigilance. "You'll attract attention," Mark said. Daniel nodded. "I know." Mark's voice lowered slightly. "Systems don't like exceptions." Daniel's did not rise. "Then they'll have to learn to see them." For the first time, Mark looked uncertain. He masked it quickly, straightening his jacket. "I'll be watching," he said. Daniel held his ground. Rex did not move. After Mark left, Daniel sat alone on the porch, hands clasped, heart beating steadily. The money was already thinning, redirected into materials, permits, basics, supplies. He did not regret it. Regret came from pretending you could outrun who you were. Rex settled at his feet, the dog's presence constant through every tense exchange. When Daniel doubted, Rex stayed. When pressure mounted, Rex held the line without aggression or retreat. He was not a weapon. He was an anchor. That evening, Daniel gathered Frank and Emily at the table. "We're not hiding anymore," he said. "There will be rules, transparency. Work when you can. Help when you're able. This place will not save anyone by itself. People will have to choose to stay honest." Frank nodded slowly. "That I can do." Emily looked at Rex, then back at Daniel. "Will people be kind?" Daniel paused. "Some will," he said. "Some won't. But they'll have a place to start." Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the fields in muted gold. The farm stood quiet, no longer abandoned, no longer waiting. Daniel did not know what battles lay ahead. He only knew he was no longer fighting alone. And he was not running. The conflict did not explode the way Daniel once would have expected. There were no shouting matches, no threats delivered in the dark, no dramatic confrontations at the edge of the property. Instead, it arrived quietly, through letters, meetings, and the slow tightening of systems that preferred order over compassion. Daniel understood that now. The first community meeting was held in the old Grange Hall on the edge of town, a long rectangular building with warped wooden floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed outside. The chairs did not match. Some were metal, some plastic, some old enough to creak under the weight of memory. Daniel arrived early, Rex walking beside him, leash loose, posture calm. The German shepherd drew glances, but no fear. People recognized steadiness when they saw it. Mark Holloway arrived later, impeccably dressed as always, his coat draped neatly over his arm. He nodded to a few familiar faces. his expression neutral, professional. He looked like a man who belonged in rooms where decisions were made, not questioned. Daniel stood when it was his turn to speak. He did not bring charts or projections. He spoke plainly about the farm, about the repairs, about the rules he had set. Temporary stays, work exchange when possible, clear timelines, no hiding, no favors asked without accountability. This is not a business venture, he said, and it's not charity. It's a place where people can stop long enough to get back on their feet without being treated like a problem that needs removing. A murmur passed through the room, skepticism mixed with curiosity. Mark rose next. He did not contradict Daniel directly. He never did. He spoke of zoning concerns, liability, precedent. He spoke carefully, using words that sounded reasonable because they were. He ended with a familiar conclusion. Good intentions do not always produce good outcomes. Daniel listened without interruption. Rex lay at his feet, eyes open, ears flicking at, shifts in tone. Then something unexpected happened. A man near the back stood up. His name was Caleb Morris, though Daniel only knew him by face until that moment. He was in his early 50s, broad through the chest, his left arm moving slightly slower than the right. His beard was untrimmed, threaded with gray, his clothes clean but worn thin. He spoke with hesitation at first. "I stayed on that farm last winter," Caleb said. 3 weeks. Daniel fixed my truck when it broke down. Didn't charge me. Just asked that I help clear brush. I did. I left with work lined up and a roof over my head. Another woman stood. Her name was Ruth Klein, a nurse who had lived in the county for decades. Short, sturdy, hair cropped close for practicality rather than fashion. Her eyes were sharp but kind. She nodded toward Daniel. "His parents helped my brother years ago," she said, quietly, "when he was drinking too much and sleeping in his car. They never asked for anything back. He's sober now." One by one, people stood. A farmhand, a retired mechanic, a single mother who had never stayed on the property but had received groceries when she needed them most. Each story was simple, unpolished, honest. Mark's posture shifted, not defensive, calculating. Emily sat beside Frank near the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Rex remained close, his presence grounding her as the room filled with voices that did not sound angry. They sounded grateful. Mark stood again when the room quieted. He did not argue. He adjusted his tone, choosing precision over persuasion. "The county will require oversight," he said. "Documentation, limits, transparency." Daniel nodded. "That's fair. There was no victory declared, no applause." But something changed. The weight shifted from suspicion to responsibility shared. Over the following weeks, the process moved forward. Inspectors returned, this time with clipboards held less tightly. Forms were filed. Conditions were met. Daniel worked closely with Linda Perez from the school, who helped ensure Emily's enrollment remained stable. Linda visited the farm once, her practical shoes sinking into the dirt as she walked the perimeter. "You're doing this the hard way," she said, adjusting her glasses. Daniel smiled faintly. "It's the only way I know." Frank took on a more visible role, managing what he could, advising rather than lifting. His posture improved, not because his body had healed, but because purpose had returned. Emily began to laugh without catching herself afterward. She did homework at the kitchen table, Rex stretched at her feet, tail occasionally thumping when she read aloud. Mark came to the farm one final time. He arrived without the sedan, driving a truck this time, less polished, more practical. He walked the land slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes taking in the repaired roof, the cleared paths, the people moving with quiet purpose. He stopped near the fence where Daniel stood, Rex beside him as always. "You've made your case," Mark said. "Not with money, with people." Daniel did not respond immediately. He watched Frank helping a neighbor fix a gate, their movements synchronized despite the age difference. He watched Emily chasing Rex across the yard, her laughter unrestrained. Mark exhaled slowly. Perhaps I spent too long measuring land by what it could become instead of who it already held. Daniel met his gaze. "It's easy to do." Mark nodded once. "I won't stand in your way." He paused, then added quietly, "You won't get rich doing this." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "I know." Mark left without bitterness. No handshake, no threats, just acceptance. That evening, Daniel stood alone at the edge of the field as the sun dipped low. The farm was no longer just his burden. It had become a shared commitment, fragile but real. Rex sat beside him, calm and watchful, no longer guarding against loss, but holding space for what had been built. Daniel understood something, then, that had eluded him before. Strength did not always come from standing alone. Sometimes it came from standing still long enough for others to join you. The farm never became what people would call successful. There were no glossy signs by the road, no grants large enough to erase worry, no sudden turn where money stopped being a concern. What it became instead was steady. And for Daniel, that was everything. Mornings began early, but not in the frantic way they once had. The roof no longer leaked. The lights stayed on. The barn stood reinforced, still scarred, but honest about its age. Daniel woke with purpose instead of dread. He brewed coffee strong enough to wake his bones and stepped onto the porch to feel the air before the day claimed him. The land smelled of soil and cut grass, of work done slowly and repeated often. Frank found his place without ceremony. His work was light now, as it needed to be. He handled records, kept track of supplies, repaired small tools at a bench by the window where the light was best. His posture remained slightly bent, his hands still stiff in the cold, but his face had softened. The weight he carried no longer came from guilt. It came from belonging. The old man spoke little, but when he did, it was with the quiet authority of someone who had endured and chosen to stay kind anyway. Emily changed the most, though it happened so gradually that Daniel barely noticed until one afternoon when he heard laughter carry across the yard. Real laughter, unrestrained. She ran with other children now, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that bounced as she moved, her thin frame stronger, more certain. School projects cluttered the kitchen table. Colored pencils replaced emergency supplies. She spoke of friends by name, of teachers who challenged her, of plans that stretched further than survival. Daniel watched her often from a distance, Rex beside him. The German Shepherd moved slower these days. His muzzle had gone almost entirely silver, his once powerful stride measured now, deliberate. His eyes, however, had not dulled. They remained watchful, thoughtful, full of the same quiet intelligence that had guided Daniel home when he had not known where he was going. Rex no longer slept in the center of the house. He chose the gate. Each morning, after Daniel finished his first round of chores, Rex walked to the edge of the property where the gravel road bent gently toward the trees. He lowered himself there, body resting against the fence post his father had once repaired. head lifted just enough to see who approached. He did not bark. He did not bristle. He waited. People came quietly. A man passing through in an old truck, eyes hollow with exhaustion. A woman with a backpack and a story she was not ready to tell. A veteran who recognized something in Daniel's posture before a word was spoken. They stayed a night, sometimes two. They worked if they could. They listened to the rules. Some moved on. A few stayed longer. None were promised miracles, only honesty. Daniel did not pretend it was easy. There were days when money ran thin again, when repairs demanded more than he had planned, when the weight of being responsible pressed hard against his chest. But he no longer asked the question that had once haunted him. He was no longer choosing between saving others and drowning himself. He had chosen to stay. One evening, as autumn settled into the fields and the air sharpened with the promise of winter, Daniel found himself alone in the barn, leaning against the same wall where everything had changed. He ran a hand over the wood, feeling the grain, the imperfections. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, not as sound, but as feeling. Sarah had been a slender woman, always moving, always noticing what others missed. Her brown hair had gone streaked with gray early, tied back with practical care. Her skin bore the marks of sun and labor, but her eyes had remained gentle, even when life demanded more than she could give. His father, Thomas, had been broader, quieter, a man shaped by responsibility rather than comfort. His beard had always been trimmed short, his hands calloused, his presence steady. He had believed in fixing what broke, not because it was efficient, but because leaving things broken felt like surrender. Daniel understood now that they had never expected him to return and save the farm. They had expected him to return and decide. The decision echoed through the days that followed. Frank took on a small paid role with the county, cataloging agricultural tools for older farms transitioning ownership. It suited him. Emily stood on the porch one afternoon, waving a paper above her head, a certificate from school recognizing her progress. Daniel hugged her, awkward but sincere, his eyes burning with a pride that startled him. Rex lay nearby, tail thumping softly against the boards. Mark Holloway never returned, but his influence faded without drama. The systems that once felt threatening now moved with cautious respect. Documentation was kept. Limits were observed. The farm remained modest, but legitimate. It existed in the open. One late afternoon, Daniel sat on the fence rail beside Rex, watching the road. The sky stretched wide, painted with slow-moving clouds. The dog shifted closer, leaning his weight gently against Daniel's leg. "You did good," Daniel murmured, resting a hand on the coarse fur. Not because he needed reassurance, but because gratitude felt right. Rex did not respond, as he never had. He simply stayed. As winter approached, Rex slept more. His breathing grew deeper, slower. Daniel noticed the way the dog paused before standing, the way stares required thought now. He adjusted without complaint. He moved Rex's bed closer to the door, where the dog preferred to rest. Not guarding, watching. One morning, Daniel found Rex already at the gate, sitting upright, posture dignified despite the stiffness in his joints. The dog's eyes followed a car slowing on the road. Daniel walked over and stood beside him. "Someone needs a place, Rex," Daniel said, quietly. Rex's tail flicked once. Daniel understood then, with a clarity that brought both peace and ache, that time would continue to move whether he was ready or not. Rex would not sit at that gate forever. Neither would Frank work at his bench. Emily would grow and leave. The farm itself would age, but the choice would remain. The legacy his parents had left him was not money or land or even shelter. It was permission. Permission to stay. Permission to build something imperfect and still call it worthy. Permission to believe that choosing people was not weakness. As the sun dipped low, Daniel stayed where he was, the farm behind him alive with quiet purpose, the road ahead open but no longer tempting. He was no longer running. He was home. This story is not about a farm, a hidden inheritance, or even survival after hardship. It is about a choice. A man who returned from war carrying invisible weight chose not to run when life became heavy again. He chose people over comfort, responsibility over escape, and community over isolation. Through small, imperfect actions, a broken place became steady, and wounded lives found room to breathe. Healing did not arrive all at once. It arrived quietly, through patience, shared work, open doors, and the courage to stay. Many of us wait for a miracle that looks loud and sudden, but often God works differently. Sometimes the miracle is the strength to remain when leaving would be easier. Sometimes it is a heart that softens instead of hardening. Sometimes it is a loyal presence beside us, guiding us to do what is right even when we are afraid. In daily life, faith shows up in ordinary choices made with love. If this story touched you, perhaps it reflects a moment in your own life where you are being asked to stay, to care, or to believe again. Please share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story reminded you of. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that heal. And may God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps, giving you peace, strength, and light on your journey.